So, we're back?
Yeah, it's been a really long time.
It's been a year, which is fine, because hopefully we will do one major season a year and maybe work up towards mini seasons in between.
Yeah, I hope so. We do apologise. We had all the intention of coming back sooner. It's just, we've got very busy lives.
Yeah, we're both planning weddings. Life is lifing.
Yeah.
Which is exciting though.
Yeah, it is.
But welcome back to Scared in the Name of Science. How have you been?
Yeah, I've been really good. Just been busy with work. I'm studying for my masters. Just life stuff. What about you?
Yeah, same. Just been working a lot and travelling a lot. There's been a lot of big events in my life in the last year with my friends and stuff like that, so it's been a lot of travelling and doing that kind of thing. But I've also been reading an awful lot, which has been really nice to get back into, especially lots of books about fairies. Ooh. Not the type we'll be talking about, but other fairies.
You can't see, but I'm pulling a face.
If you know, you know. And speaking of which, would you like to announce what this season 2 is going to be all about?
Fairies!
Twinkly, sparkly little things, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Well, for me, my first awareness of fairies was the Rainbow Magic series of fairy books by Daisy Meadows. And I do put that in apostrophes because it's actually 4 different authors. They're all Daisy Meadows. I know you've encountered the books too. Was that your first fairy thing?
I don't think it was my first fairy thing. I mean, I had a fairy themed bedroom as
cool.
a little girl, and my mother and grandmother would always tell me about fairies, and I always had pictures of them hanging in my room and little figurines that they would suspend from the ceiling and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I did love the Rainbow Magic books. I think my favourite was Ruby the Red Fairy.
Nice. Yeah. What was the bedroom like then that was fairy themed?
So I've kind of had 2 fairy themed bedrooms. One was very nature, so it was a lot of daisies and greens and yellows. Ooh. And then when I moved into my big girl room at the age of 5 in the new house, as they called it, it was pink and purple with lots of fairies, and I had a canopy above my bed.
Oh, cool.
It was a little pink castle thing. It was very fairy tale.
Nice, that sounds really cool. I will say I think probably the room we're recording in now, which is my study, is probably the most fairy-like room I've ever had, since I've got dark blue walls but pink bedding and lots of fairy lights and stuff like that.
It's a really cute room.
Thanks. I think we have a couple of shout-outs this season as well we're going to start doing.
Yeah, absolutely. A big shout-out to DTSYL36 and Kirsty.Davis17. Some of our new followers have been really active on our Instagram, commenting and taking part in polls. So thank you guys. It's been really cool to see people getting excited in the community.
Yeah. If you would like to get a shout out, please get involved in our social media, and we will have the links at the end of the episode about where you can find us. So, Al, are you ready to dive into the mysterious and magical world of the fairy?
I'm certainly very excited to hear some stories.
Throughout this season, I thought it would be a really good idea to start off by having some consistency and addressing the differences between the words fae, fairy, fairy with an AE instead of an AI, and the different ways that we term fairy, essentially. In general, I'm going to be referring to fairies FAIRY as a standard. And the reason for this is the more I was reading about it and the more I was deep diving, is there was just no actual etymological reason for the differences that I could find. The origin of the word comes from the Latin fata, meaning fate, which was then twisted and churned through the Romantic languages before settling in the UK as the word we know of fairy. References to fairies have been found with various spellings, hence fae, hence fairy with an AE instead. It was only sort of when spelling was standardised in the UK because of William Caxton's introduction of the printing press in 1476 that they standardised what the word would be, and sort of a lot of the more different versions settle down into this one. So there's no actual proper reason for the differences. However, there is a claim that fairies themselves do have a preference for what they are called, and I don't know if you've come across this, but I certainly have, that fairies are very particular about names. But as soon as I can verify what a fairy's preferred name and pronoun is, I will be happy to oblige. So fairies need to let me know, essentially. From the Tylwyth Teg to Nordic trolls, we will be exploring in brief the lore relating to fairies. Although I don't think this is going to be as scary as last season, fairies are purported to have powers that we should or could potentially fear. Now, just to assess where we sit on this, this. You don't believe in this topic at all, right? Have you ever seen a fairy?
Absolutely not. I think I believe in this topic less so than ghosts.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so I guess on that vein, I've definitely never seen a fairy either.
But you've had fun little experiences about, like, the odd mountain, though.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely, like, felt like a pull or like a draw to certain spaces, but I don't think there's any, like, little people fishing rodding me into wandering off into the dark.
Well, hopefully some of the stories we talk about this season will convince you otherwise.
I doubt it.
So to begin with, we're going to start the season very close to home, just like we did with season 1, Hosea Pope, and we will open by discussing the Tylwyth Teg. According to Reverend Elias Owen, the Tylwyth Teg is the most general name that occurs for Welsh fairies, and is a more expressive and descriptive phrase that classifies them as a race or people that are known for being beautiful. Although the Welsh do have different types of fairies, the Tylwyth Teg is the one we're going to be looking at in this episode, but we might explore different types later on down the line. And I know we've mentioned the Púca before, which is another type of Welsh fairy. The first reference to the Tylwyth Teg comes from Giraldus Cambrensis, circa 1146-1222, who was a Welsh clergyman, and he was obsessed with 3 things, and I thought you'd get a kick out of these 3 things. 1, he was obsessed with the idea that Wales should become independent from England. Still a thing. Yes, Cymru, for example. 2, he was obsessed with becoming the Archbishop of St David, and he applied for it multiple times, and every time got rejected. And 3, he was obsessed with studying the last colony of Eurasian beavers in Wales.
Now, see that last one, that's worth devoting a lifetime to. I get that. 100%.
I believe they're about to reintroduce beavers back into Wales, actually.
Yeah, they should be released back into the UK.
Yeah, they should. But in general, he was a very proud Welshman. And the Tylwyth Teg he recorded the first written mention of them. But there are many synonyms for them, and they are potentially mentioned prior to this, just without the specific name and not written down. And because much of Welsh folklore is passed down through oral tradition, so speaking, different names would be used without it specifically being named the Tylwyth Teg. Now, I know I've already done a tiny etymology lesson with where fairy came from, but how about a second one for the session, yeah? I think it's the last one, I think.
Sounds good.
So Tylwyth originates from the Welsh word for family Tylw, and Teg means fair or beautiful. So most individuals believe that these creatures or race were referred to as the fair family or the beautiful family, as another way to sort of placate the fairies by giving them a nice name, essentially. Giraldus, as I said, gave us a first glimpse into this with his story of Elidorus, who says, as often as they returned from our hemisphere, they reprobated our ambition, infidelities, and inconstancies, and though they had no form of public worship, were, it seemed, strict lovers and reverers of truth. However, it is really important to understand that in this story, Elidorus is 12 years old, and that will come up again.
Okay.
So, understanding that the Tylwyth Teg have been referenced orally prior to this, we must include any stories that sound of smaller individuals with fair skin and long hair and mischievous personalities to be the Tylwyth Teg, and this therefore sends the stories of them back even further than the 12th century. The fair, however, as mentioned by Giraldus, could be in reference to their perceived love of justice and equality instead of, like, being fair complexion or fair haired, for example. We don't know. They talked about in both. However, there is another writer who gives a few more details of the Tylwyth Teg, which helps to differentiate them from the traditional teeny tiny twinkle fairies we know from being raised in England, I would say.
Speak for yourself, I grew up on stories of the Cornish pixies.
They're still teeny tiny fairies.
I would not call them twinkle fairies, absolutely.
We can talk about that another time though, definitely. So Mr. John Lewis Jones, a bard from Ynysmon, describes them as beings no larger than children 6 or 7 years old. And that's slightly different than the perceived idea of fairies and being like a couple of inches tall. These are more proper sized people kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So we have a general description of the Tylwyth Teg, a childlike creature of humanoid figure, fair complexion and long hair, with a strong sense of what is correct and love for all things truthful. I'm going to present a few different cases of potential Tylwyth Teg, and I'm going to let you tell us whether you think it is a fairy or something else, and I can't wait to see what other theories you come up with.
This is just going to be the alien big cats or your poltergeist malarkey all over again.
Absolutely not. That's for a later episode. So the first story I want to bring you comes from the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast, which is a brilliant resource for the sharing of eyewitness accounts of fairy encounters and is still ongoing at the moment. Jo, the host, interviews people who've seen fairies in a careful, considerate and very honest way. She's an excellent interviewer from the episodes I've listened to, but also looks into like a smorgasbord of related phenomena. She does like chakra stuff and tea leaves and everything like that, so I think I've got a new person to be obsessed with. So I highly recommend checking out that podcast. But the story I want to bring you takes place in Wales, and again, I want you to decide whether you think this sounds like it could be the Tylwyth Teg or something else. The lady who told the story to Jo had 3 overall instances where she believes she witnessed fairies. The first instance was in 1987 in her garden in Wales. She had fairy statues in her garden which she'd actually purchased in London and brought with her. Every night she would go out and say "night night fairies" and then turn the solar lights off that were next to them. One night she went out and said "night night fairies," turned the solar light off, and the light came on and then off again. And she was just like, that's a bit strange, what a coincidence. Let's scientifically test run this and try it again. So she did the same thing. She put the light on and went "night night fairies," turned it off, and the light again went on and then turned off again. She thought nothing too much of it, just like, that's a really weird coincidence. And then went and the next day checked these lights, these solar lights, and it turned out that not only did they not turn on, but they were completely broken and couldn't switch on anymore. What do you think?
I mean, dodgy lighting is a cornerstone of dismissible paranormal phenomena. Let's add to that 1987 solar lights. Solar lights are pretty rubbish nowadays. I can't imagine them being any better then.
True, but she did try it more than once and the same result happened.
Okay, and she left for a period of time and she came back and they were broken.
Yeah.
Anything could have broken a night in the light.
That's true.
Light in the night. That was a hard one.
Say it 3 times fast.
She didn't see any fairies. That's just such a non-story.
Fair enough.
It is. I'm sorry. Having a broken light isn't a fairy encounter, and it's certainly not a story.
Okay.
To be honest.
I think it is also worth mentioning that this lady opens her story by discussing a hurricane, which was actually, having researched it, probably the Great Storm of 1973, which blew down trees into her garden. It could be suggested that the solar panel lights had been sent on a fritz by the weather. It could have been hit by falling debris or hit by the tree themselves, and that could have affected the lights. A lot of different things.
You know, if she was an electrician, maybe I'd be considering her story a bit more seriously, but
okay.
I know nothing about electrics, and even I know if a light plays up, it doesn't mean that there's anything.
Yeah. It just seems funny that she was literally saying "night night fairies" with these solar lights next to these statues.
Well, she already clearly believes in fairies then, doesn't she? And I think you were talking about psychological priming in earlier seasons. So.
Yeah, last season we talked about that indeed. Well, the second instance that she talked about was a few weeks later and was actually a little bit away from her house down an alley. She was meditating under an oak tree when she saw a procession of people moving past. At first she thought they were normal people until they got closer and she knew that they were fairy folk. She was so surprised that she said, "Why are you dressed like that?" As they were wearing very medieval lord and lady kind of clothing that were very rich in colour and had lots of luscious fabrics. And they responded with, "This is how we looked the last time people saw us." And they were normal people sized. This made me think of something we've talked about before.
Yeah, it does sound like the kind of funeral procession that I think has cropped up quite a few times. But to me it sounds like there's 2 possibilities here. She fell asleep whilst meditating and kind of dreamt something. She experienced a waking hallucination, which I understand how real they are. I have experienced them myself, and it takes a good chunk of time to remember what's actually going on. And again, if she was psychologically primed to see fairies, then it's not entirely unreasonable that is what she would see. Also, if they're people-sized, I mean, it's just a person then, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily correlate with the size of the Tylwyth Teg.
Yeah, the story can then essentially be, I saw people in strange clothes wandering around, and I think anyone who has been near a con event would know what that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, that comment, though, this is how we looked the last time people saw us, is really interesting, though. Obviously, we did talk about phantom funerals before, and fairy funerals are really common in Wales as, an encounter that people have seen. They're everywhere in the stories. They're everywhere, really, so I kind of understand why her mind might jump to that. The other thing I want to pull out is that she said she was sat under oak trees, and oak trees come up in a lot of different stories to do with fairies as well. Oak leaves are mentioned as part of a charm to summon trolls. Fairies are supposed to live inside them or inhabit groves of them, but I kept coming back to the same question, which I couldn't really find a good answer for that I liked, which was, why do fairies love oak trees?
Well, I think that's a bit of a tricky one. Oak trees are massively intertwined in British folklore. I think it's due to their long lifespans and their distinctive leaves. They kind of mature around the age of 70 to 100, and any child would be able to identify an oak leaf. Also, they also produce acorns, which... As children, as just such fascinating objects. I used to love collecting acorns. I mean, you could also look at the influences from the story of the Oak King from, pagan beliefs. To be honest, I think it would be stranger if oak trees weren't mentioned in fairy folklore.
Oh, fair. Interesting. Okay. The majority of the information I could find discusses that these trees have been sacred for fairy magic and represent steadfastness and great life with the reaching branches, as you mentioned, and they have really wide-spreading root systems as well. And they appear to be highly sacred to the druids of old times. All I can assume is that there is a link between then druids and fairies which connects this kind of stuff. What at this point I'm not sure of, so if someone would love to enlighten me, please do, because I'm really curious as to know what the actual link is between the two. So the third instance, and the main one that I think we need to look at from this lady, was she was digging in her garden just in the vegetable patch and became aware of someone kind of looking at her, and she had that really strong sense that someone was staring at her. She looked up and there was a man standing there looking at her wearing bright purple trousers. He had brown curly hair, rosy cheeks, was stocky and no more than 3 foot in height, and this, I'm not gonna lie, instantly made me think of hobbits.
Yeah, it
really did. She bowed to him out of respect and he vanished. However, over the next few weeks, things started going missing in her house and things would start breaking down and stop working, like the lights, for example. And she kept catching flashes of him in the corner of her eye. Eventually, though, she got a little bit tired of this because things kept going slightly wrong. So she decided to sit down quietly and then outwardly asked him to leave. And she never saw him again. And he left. What do you think?
She was being tormented by a child, ? I mean, she's had 2 other prior experiences with fairies, both of which are exceedingly unbelievable, and I think this one just adds to that. If anything, makes it more likely that she's making stuff up. I'm afraid it's just adding extra layers of disbelief.
But why would she go and make this up?
I don't know. Like I said, maybe something was happening to her, but I just think that she's so down to believe it's fairies that absolutely anything could be going on, and she's going, oh, it's a fairy. It's like, let's say I had a bunch of serial killer statues in my living room. If I heard something drop in the night, where's my mind immediately going to go to?
True, is that priming effect again.
It's it's unreliable.
But do you think that sounds like, if it was a fairy, it could be a Tylwyth Teg, though, knowing what we know about them?
Sure.
It's 3 foot high.
Yeah, okay, sure. It also just sounds like a child, additionally.
I guess. But she said it was a man, not a child. I think all of us can tell the difference between a man and a child.
Well, she hasn't gone into anything about describing his features other than saying curly brown hair and rosy cheeks.
True.
And I associate rosy cheeks with playing children.
Fair enough. Okay.
She's not going, he's got a great big gruff beard, and he goes, all right, mate, and sinks a pint of Stella. There's nothing in that description separates a man from a boy.
Do you know what's really funny, actually? My god siblings, when they were little growing up, used to have this belief that the difference between a man and a woman and a man and a child was that a man has a beard. That was the only differentiation for them.
That's funny.
Yeah, it really was.
No, that's not the only differentiation, but if one's 3 foot, then, that's a pretty good indicator.
Fair.
There could be other explanations, obviously, as well. But my main point is she hasn't actually described looking at a man, if that makes sense. She just...
So you would want more details from this?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
So I'm going to talk to you about a different case now then instead. And this one comes from another book full of witness sightings that is called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, and it actually looks at this from like a scientific point of view and goes into its scientific methodology and things like that as well, which I think is really interesting and really cool. This book is over 100 years old. However, the testimony of this story I found particularly interesting as it happened to another adult as opposed to a child, and normally a lot of these stories of fairy sightings come from children. U.Y. Evans Wentz interviewed two sisters in Ynysmon who happened to be 103 and 100 years old. The younger sister testified that about 60 years ago she was passing Tynemyneth Farm when a little man appeared. She approached and he disappeared suddenly, a power she had heard the Tylwyth Teg to have.
I mean, it could just be an exaggerated story.
Right, but he just disappeared. Why would she lie?
She could have just not seen where we could have just like left abruptly, and it's one of those things that's been exaggerated. I don't think that's. I mean, yeah, if he literally just vanished in a puff of smoke, but you're also asking people who were like 100
to remember
a story from 60 plus years ago.
I guess, but like it was a local thing that they knew that they'd experienced these fairies and things like that. That's why he was directed to them to go and talk to them.
Ah, so again, it's the whole priming thing where.
Well, no, because this happened 60 years ago.
Yeah, when they would have been probably a lot more.
Well, they were like 40.
Yeah, but if they'd grown up on fairy folklore.
I don't know if they had. Probably had. It was Ynysmon.
Everyone in the UK grows up hearing some form of fairy folklore.
Right, but if this book was 100 years old and then these people were like 100 years still, I don't know what was happening like 200 years ago.
I don't know, probably even more superstitious stuff.
Maybe, yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, I don't know, that's just, okay. I don't really know how to react to that one.
Alright. A third one then, from the same book. So this one details another case of the Tylwyth Teg. 24-year-old Mrs. Jones was walking home one night when a very pretty young lady of ordinary size appeared. She reached out a hand and it went right through the young woman. She was very confused, so she tried to touch her again, but again a hand just passed straight through. Mrs. Jones tried to speak to her with a good night and why do you not speak? But the woman did not reply and then disappeared. Mrs. Jones put this down to Tylwyth Teg. What do you think it was?
I mean, that's a pretty wild story. You're speaking to someone, your arm passes through them. I'm surprised you're not immediately going, it's a ghost, which is, might be what you were kind of more along the lines of. Again, I don't really know what I can say to that one. I just don't think that's what's happened.
But like she put her hand through her.
Yeah, but you're taking what she's saying at face value.
Yeah.
And I think you'd have to be a little bit naive to take what she says at face value, I'm afraid, because that's not something that happens.
I just think that
maybe there was an interesting lighting of, like we were talking about, was it ghost ships?
Yeah.
And interesting optical effects.
Yeah. I just think it's really interesting that she tried more than once and nothing happened, but I also think it's really interesting on this one that she put it down to a fairy. Nothing about that screams fairy at me. She could put a hand through her. This was a normal sized person. The person would not reply to her. That's, as you alluded, does sound like a ghost to me. It doesn't sound anything like a Tylwyth Teg or a fairy. It's normal size. And see-through, I guess?
Yeah, I don't know. It just sounds like a story, or, benefit for doubt. Something happened that she wasn't quite sure what, and then she's exaggerated certain aspects of it.
Fair enough. Having read through lots of stories about the Tylwyth Teg, I wanted to point out a few common things I've noticed about the stories as well to sort of give us a more rounded view of them. So, song and music are a key thing for this type of fairy. They are often encountered singing or playing music of a beautiful, kind of ethereal sort. One story stated that they use music as a method to tempt humans to their world as well. Nature is their preferred realm, so don't expect the Tylwyth Teg in densely populated areas. Like, we're not going to see them in the middle of a city, I think. But they also seem to be able to speak Welsh, which is pretty cool. So any of these stories convince you that Tylwyth Teg are a thing?
No. But they are really, they're really interesting stories, and I'm a big fan of fairy folklore. So it's I'm enjoying them, but I don't think some very questionable eyewitness accounts are going to do much.
That's fair. I do think it's really interesting that there are enough accounts to fill websites and books from different people in different periods of time, all saying sort of kind of consistent things. I do think that has to lend some kind of credibility that there is something kind of there.
Yeah, absolutely. There might be something, but that something doesn't necessarily have to be fairies.
That's fair. What do you think it could be?
I don't know, and that's okay. I don't know if I'm taking everyone at face value and they're 100% telling the truth across every single account. Sure, there must be something, but I don't know what that is, and I'm not going to go, it's those darn little people.
Fair enough. Overall, the Tylwyth Teg are one of the oldest named examples of fairies, dating back even further than the 13th century reference by Gervase Tilbury. The fair family are smallish creatures with fair skin and a multitude of hair colours from the sounds of it. They often dress in naturalistic colours but sometimes appear in more lavish garments, especially if they are higher up royalty. Speaking both Welsh and the common tongue, they usually sing to attract humans to their lands and are often stolen as people's spouses too. I do recommend treating a Tylwyth Teg kindly, as generosity to them is rewarded, whereas slights are rewarded in kind. They are all about fairness, as I mentioned earlier.
I don't know, it doesn't seem fair to me. Like, someone's a little bit rude to you, now you've ruined their life.
Yeah,
That's not equal exchange.
I mean, it's the same thing that's talked about all the time. Treat others how you would want to be treated.
Yeah, but if you, like, hear the stories of, like, the retaliations, it's not eye for an eye, it's I thought I'm gonna kill you now.
Yeah, it is a little bit like, you broke a twig branch, I'm gonna curdle your milk. Like, still, yes, be nice to the Fae, say hello, be very kind to them, I think.
Yeah, okay.
So that was our episode on the Tylwyth Teg, and do you know what? I've really missed doing this. I'm still trying to get a little bit back into it. I still feel a little bit stiff, though, I will say. I know I messaged you whilst we were both researching to say how much I missed this whole thing, and I'm so excited for what's to come this season, particularly episode 5, I think it is. Do you have an episode you're particularly excited for?
I'm really excited for the episode I'm doing on, like, some Nordic folklore. I think that's going to be so cool. I'm also really excited to talk about fairy rings.
Yes, we've been messaging back and forth, and I've just been getting lots of mushrooms messages.
Yeah, mushrooms are so cool, man.
So, as I mentioned at the start of the episode, please get involved with us on social media. You can find us on Threads, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, and on Spotify now. So please feel free to hit us up on that. And if you see any posts or videos or anything that you would like to talk to us about, please tag us. Do you want to tell us where?
Tag us at Sitnos, hashtag SITNOS.
And we've also got our email address as well, which is scaredinthenameofscience@gmail.com. So if you've got any witness accounts you want to tell us about, I promise that Al will not be allowed to tell you you're a liar.
I don't like doing that, but, you know, I will assume... I will give you the benefit of the doubt, but I would be very naive to assume that you're telling 100% of the truth.
And I will be that very naive person. But yeah, so please get in touch, and thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, guys. It's been great.